Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Thriving in Hospice, Strategies to Bring Peace of Mind to Staffing and Financial Performance. I'm Hospice News Managing Editor Bob Holly, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. A huge thank you to CareXM for bringing this webinar to all of us today. CareXM is trusted by over 4,500 providers for their cutting-edge approach that integrates industry-wide software with top-tier 24/7 nurse triage and non-clinical answering. This, combines with innovative patient engagement tools and RPM, empowers CareXM to lower costs and elevate the care experience for its partners. Before I introduce our two speakers here in just a second, I did want to go over some housekeeping items. First, please note that you have been placed into listening only mode. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on your screens to submit that question, and we'll address as many as we can in the next hour or so. And also, please note that this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent in a follow-up email after the presentation. I'm now pleased to introduce our two speakers. Joining me today are Dean Somerville, Triage Solutions Director at CareXM. Dean is a seasoned professional with over 2 decades in sales and business development experience. He specializes in enterprise strategy and deal-making, process analysis, and innovative leadership. As the Director of Triage Solutions at CareXM, he empowers healthcare organizations through the implementation of new technologies, patient-centric approaches, and cost-saving initiatives. Also joining me is Lori Nelson, Head of Clinical Solutions at CareXM. Lori is the Head of Clinical Solutions at CareXM, where she's worked for over 12 years, helping providers integrate new technologies into their patient care processes, which improve both the patient and the caregiver experience. They help lower costs, bring peace of mind to staffing. And what's important to note for this conversation too, Lori is a former ICU nurse, so she knows firsthand what it's like to be a frontline care worker from that personal experience. Lori, Dean, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Scott.
All right, well, let's dive right in. And I think, Lori, this question's for you to start, to kind of kick things off. What are you seeing when you look at the hospice market as some of the most challenging aspects for providers?
Well, we get really maybe tired of the overuse of the term staffing, but really want to start with staffing. I really feel like that is the most challenging aspect because we are in a people business. So as much as you want to try and replace people with maybe technology or different things, you can't, because we're in a people business caring for people. So, staffing, it's historically been an issue, and it continues to compound as we see the universal staffing crisis in healthcare, not just home health and hospice. But those challenges obviously impact home health and hospice, and it really becomes the challenge because you staff 24/7. You don't really get to predict when people leave this life. It doesn't happen between 8 and 5 as much as we'd like to have it, happen during office hours. We don't have control over that. So really we're staffing for 24/7, but we tend to staff the bulk of our team members during those office hours where we really try and get as much work done as possible. But really that leaves over 123 hours outside of office hours that the team has to staff for, which is where the challenge comes in. So we're asking them to do the majority of the patient care or the patient experience happens outside of what we would consider office hours. The majority of the care happens, but we staff the minority support. We'll just call it that. Because we want to keep our costs down, we tend to staff less in the after hours time frame, and that is really where the biggest impact on the patient experience happens. So we tend to staff to keep our costs down at a smaller number after hours because there are so many hours to cover. The hard part is that we have higher workload for those team members who are working, which is where the staffing challenge comes in. We also are facing a different level of care or acuity with the patients that we are caring for. So you're staffing less, fewer resources, higher workload, higher acuity patients. And it really is becoming the after hours staffing challenge is our Achilles heel when it comes to the success of our hospice programs and our quality programs. So, we use that term staffing lightly and often, but also is really such a huge role in what we do in hospice because we're a people business. We are helping people walk through one of the most critical parts of their life. So you can't replace that with anything but people, which then becomes our biggest challenge at times.
Yeah, I mean there are so many challenges that operators have to face in hospice these days, from changing payment models to increased oversight this year, next year, but staffing really seems to be the challenge that we can't get around. Dean, anything else that you would add to Lori's response there?
Kind of along those same lines, Bob, is with staffing, we've heard specifically from most of our clients, right, and our partners that post-COVID staffing expenses have gone up and the costs have gone up anywhere from 25 to 30%. And so I think that we hear it from many of our clients that we are having intense financial pressure on the organizations today in hospice. We're seeing that some of our clients have looking at layoffs, and they've never had layoffs in the history of the organization. But those staffing challenges, the costs associated with that, along with those uh, increased oversights and virtually no changes or even decreases in the payment models, are really putting the organizations under severe pressure financially. One of our customers also said, "Look, we're in a fairly, unique situation right now where we have to look at ways that we can save on our financial side, but yet we're still not able to just reduce everything on the financial side. We have to still balance that patient experience. And so finding that the right combination and that right balance of improving the patient experience, improving the family, and even our own internal caregivers' experiences as well, along with that financial pressure. We need to look at both of those, and we really have to optimize them both. So those changing payment models are really challenging right now. And I think additionally, traditionally, we've, kind of just put the burden on the nurses on let's do more. We can't do that anymore because we see a lot of nurse burnout. And we've had again, I think the figures are that COVID, we saw about 100,000 nurses leave the industry, and I think another 100,000 are at risk in leaving the industry. And we see nurses that they don't want to be on call if they've worked all day, right? We have rotating case managers. And so those are some of the challenges that we're seeing, post COVID.
Yeah. It really feels like now more than ever, whether you're a hospice provider or a home health provider, whether you do both, you're forced to do more with less to provide either the same quality of care or greater quality of care with fewer resources, which makes pulling, all the right levers even more important. With all that in mind, one of the reasons why I was really excited to moderate this conversation is we're going to be talking about solutions, right? We're not just talking about the problem, but we're talking about ways to actually mitigate some of these challenges. Given the strain on staffing and the margin squeezes that we're seeing, what are some solutions that you're seeing providers take to alleviate those pressures? Lori, let's again start with you, and then Dean, follow up with you again.
Yeah, one of the things that you're noticing a lot in the industry is people looking for an option to do something different. So changing the way they have done things is really the answer to doing it better or different, right? So we have always tend to fall in well, this is how we've always done it in hospice and home health. And as much as we saw this big exodus in maybe retiring nurses or, nurses who have been in this space for a long time, um, sad to see them go for sure. But what it's also done is brought about a different opportunity because you're bringing in some different people to manage the business, right? Because you're seeing all these people go, and so you're bringing these different on-call staff. So you're going to have to change your model a little bit in how you are supporting your team members after hours. So you got to be more flexible. And that's the bottom line is the current model tends to be, we've always done it this way. As change has happened, you have to figure out how to be more flexible because you have different people caring for these patients, newer nurses, some of them are brand new grads that are going to care for these patients that's unheard of, to be able to say, oh, you're straight out of nursing school, let's go jump into hospice. But because of this exodus of nurses, you've got to staff differently. You've got to have some different layers, some different flexibility, different models to support your team. So historically, we've tended to support worst case scenario in staffing after hours. We are driven by the emotion of we never want to leave a patient hanging, which is a great mission driven way to set things up, right? But we tend to put more emotion into it. And what really needs to change is we want to take that emotion out of it and say we want to be able to staff to care for our patient needs and demands, not the worst case scenario. We want to understand why they need us after hours, why they need us during the day. Why are you calling to ask for X, Y, and Z after 5 p.m.? Why are you always calling on Saturday for supplies? Why am I getting med refill calls at 10 p.m.? So understanding why they need you after hours. So using data to support staffing to fill those needs. It's a different mindset because we've always really been driven by, oh, we always want to make sure somebody is available for this patient. But we can still have that same mindset if we just take a step back and say, wait, let's understand why they need us, how they need us, and when they need us, and staff to fit that model instead of, throwing the whole team at maybe some staffing models that we've always done. So as you understand why your patients need you, regardless of time of day, you can plan processes and care plans for your patients around those needs in a more data-driven approach. So being a little more flexible on those models, I think, is something that has to be looked at within every single business model that you are running in your own location, branches, multi-branches, whatever it might be, so that you can really understand your patient need and experience and with the data that you have available, and then drive processes around that instead of doing it the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
Dean, from your perspective, what solutions are you seeing to help providers alleviate some of the margin squeeze pressure or some of the staffing strain?
Well, I did what Grace said and support everything she said. Really, what I do in my job, really, when I work with clients, my job is to challenge the whys and the what's and the whys of your current models, right? What do you have in place and why do you have them in place? I need to challenge any assumptions that they make and validate those assumptions. Some of the assumptions may be correct, others may not be correct. As Lori mentioned, we can't do things the way we've always done them, just that's because that's the way we've done them. I talked to many in an organization who have they've been promoted, they're now in a new position, and that's just the model they had when they got into that position. And so I try to take a step back with them and say, okay, what are the real needs? And so let's review those staffing models. Let's ensure that that's when you need to have people in that in that position, doing what they're doing, and try to find some flexibility, right? So, for example, a lot of organizations will separate some of the duties. They'll have a triage nurse or a group of triage nurses, and then they'll have a group of visit nurses. Where some organizations that we support, it doesn't make sense to do that anymore. We can cross train and they can do both depending on where they live, right? There are a lot of variables involved. But that's just one example where we used to silo those duties and those responsibilities where we can't afford to silo them anymore. we have to spread them out as we can. That's just one example. So we really look at the workflows, challenge the assumptions. We get into details. What are they really doing? Um, is it a burden to them, or is it a perceived burden? What does the data show us? So we can get pretty specific into the what's and the whys and the hows. And again, that's my job, is to challenge any existing model. And when we look at those workflows, we can determine where automation or other support uh, systems can be put in place so that we can offload the staff burden. So that's we've seen some great successes in just really breaking down foundationally what they have in place and rebuilding that with something that makes sense.
I would also add to what you said, Dean, that because I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting what I said before, but I think as you challenge assumptions, you can really find places where you can add technology where people have been historically. And that still really allows for that focused patient care with your people. Because back to that workload burden, we're asking a lot of people to do some complex workflow tasks to get all of the boxes checked that we need to be reimbursed appropriately, to get our quality data and things like that. But as you challenge your assumptions, it also allows you to really peel back the layers and say, hey, what if we added a piece of technology here to make this simpler? So an example could be maybe your consent forms. You go out and have these great conversations with families and you're signing paperwork for 30 minutes. Well, what if we did that a little different and utilize technology with our people to make it a more streamlined process? Or, something with your staff. What are we asking them to do? Double documentation. Are we asking them to put information in this place as well as this place as well as this place? Well, let's find some technology that automates that workflow so our people can focus on patient care instead of maybe some of those administrative tasks. So as you challenge your assumptions, I would also recommend, where can technology take some of those people tasks that we've been giving them so they can do people care better instead of people tasks?
Yeah, and I definitely don't think that contradicts your previous response. I think it just reinforces the idea that hospice is a people-first industry, and you need to support those people with the tools that enable them to do their jobs, right?
Absolutely.
So CareXM and both of you work with some of the real giants in the home health and hospice industry, companies like LHC Group, like Centerwell, like Amedisys, but you also work with some of the smaller providers, and there's a lot of those in home health and hospice. Are there any insights that you could provide that help providers of varied sizes with the challenges that the hospice industry as a whole is facing? Dean, let's maybe start with you this time, and then Lori, you could follow up.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the large organizations. As I stated before, we really look at the staffing models, and what we find is that traditionally, um, we had without technology, what you typically do is you really throw people at it. And throwing people at it, you're actually throwing your most expensive resources at some of your most costly challenges, right? And that's not the right way to do that. So we go through these workflows. Again, I challenge the whys and the whats and the hows and everything. And so I use this. There's a video that I like to share with people, and you might, those listening might want to write this down. It's called the backwards brain bicycle. You can go on YouTube and look at that. And really, that's my effort into forcing people to think outside the box, so to speak. We've always done it a certain way, but we can't afford to continue to do it that way anymore. And so, how do we take a different approach? How do we see the problems differently? So, we help large organizations really understand those workflows, get very deep into the technology. And some organizations might think, well, I've used an ACD, because large organizations, really what they are is they have a centralized triage group. They're in essence, they're a contact center. They're using nurses as their agents, and they feel like, well, hey, I'm using intelligent routing, and so I'm optimized what I can do. Well, my experience, some of us at CareXM have very deep experience in contact centers, and I'm one of those. In fact, I was an auditor for a company called Benchmark Portal, which is one of the premier contact center uh, uh, not staffing firms, but consulting firms in the country. And we found that about 50%, even though they had the right technology in place, about 50% of contact centers fell into this area is what we called a sick puppy, right? So they were very expensive. It was very expensive to deliver a very poor experience. And so our goal at CareXM is to provide all of those solutions in a very intuitive, user-friendly way to not have those costly contact centers with poor experiences, but highly cost efficient and effective contact centers with excellent patient experiences. So from that perspective, for large contact centers and for large hospice organizations, they see some tremendous dollar savings when they apply all of the things that they can. We're talking about incremental improvement here. And when you're talking large numbers and you're saving a minute and a half to 2 minutes to 5 minutes off of every single interaction, that adds up very, very quickly. Now, on smaller organizations, hospice organizations, and or medium sized to 100 census organizations, they can still take advantage of that contact center type technology, even though they're not invested in it. So we look at those workflows as well, and they find that same cost optimization with that same level of high experience where they're answering clinical calls well within a minute. And so those are some of the examples where they've had great successes. Again, we're just our goal is to maximize and optimize both sides of that equation, right? That patient experience, that family member experience is extremely crucial, especially now more than ever, along with that cost side.
Yeah.
One of
Lori,
my favorite wins in, we're talking about the bigger ones so far. One of my favorite wins is not the patient experience. I'm going to shift to why I love being able to optimize and kind of challenge assumptions, because some of these clients that we have supported have always done things a certain way, right? And as we implemented some technology to do some of those tasks for them, the staff were the winners. The triage staff were really the ones who came out on top, as the technology software really allowed them to have more efficient interactions with their patients. So tasks that previously took them 20 minutes to do are now taking 10 seconds to look at, because of the technology connections that allow them to take those tasks away from them, so that when they're focused on the patient call, it's all about the patient call. So an example of that would be documentation. Because of the technology and how it's set up as a triage nurse, I'm able to go ahead and document the call in a software that is recording my call, gathering the notes, connecting me to on-call staff, capturing quality data, all while pushing that back into the EMR system. So I don't double document anymore. That is a win for the staff. So that is also a huge win that comes when you think of, challenging some of those assumptions and implementing technology into some of those people tasks instead of people care that we have definitely seen for our clients. And that doesn't have to be you using as a large organization. You can still find that same efficiency in those, whatever size you are organization, because you are able to implement some different models and different workflows. You will gain, I want to call it staff time back. Your staff are going to be able to focus on themselves, the patients, whatever their job is at that time, because we've taken away some of that burden utilizing technology.
Yeah.
And if you add the next layer, we talk about technology. finding a partner who can support you when things are not working out as well in your staffing. So these same partners we've had of all sizes, maybe you feel like you're doing it okay, but then you have this huge turnover of staff. Well, turnover is costly. Turnover is costly. When you think of how much it costs to replace a registered nurse, train them up to capacity for your procedures, that's tens of thousands of dollars every time you have to do that. So if you have a partner where maybe you don't have to do that every time because they also have people to support, goes back to that flexible model, doing something a little different. It can be cheaper than that turnover rate you're currently experiencing. Because when you have turnover, it impacts the whole process, right? So big savings also come when you have the ability to have people as your partner that can help support you through your people problems as well.
Yeah. And in today's labor market, there are those turnover costs, not just in training new workers and getting them up to speed, but often, you have to offer sign-on bonuses just to get them in the door. So turnover costs today are probably greater than ever. One of the things that I want to do is just to continue to paint this picture by sharing specifics. And I know both of you came armed with some data that help illustrate some of the things that we're talking about. So where I want to go next is having each of you kind of sharing how you utilize data to drive programs. And whoever wants to jump in first, I think, go for it.
Yeah, why don't I take that, Bob? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And what we do is we take a very consultative approach, and our goal is to work together to make sure that we're all comfortable with the approach that we're taking. I'm going to share just what we call this is just a modeling tool that we use. And a lot of times I apologize in advance. They feel like I'm interrogating them, but I really got to get specific into the details of workflows and staffing. And so we talk about what their census is, what their service is, what their census is, how many calls they're getting. We really have to have that inbound call data. That's crucial. And we have benchmarks for all of the data that we get, and we'll let them know if they're trending a little bit high, maybe they're trending a bit low. There are some times when, in fact, I don't have confidence in the call data, in the inbound call data that they're providing. And so we go a little bit deeper because we want to try to make this model just as solid as possible. And so we also ask, okay, what kind of service level? What's your percentage of clinical calls versus non-clinical calls? Someone that can address that specific need. Let's have them do that rather than a high-priced nurse. We want to ensure that they are working to the top of their license, if you will. And so we go through and find out what they call, what are their, I'm not going to go into the details. We just get a lot of data, right? The goal is to really then to say, okay, what does that look like from an actual workflow and from a work demand? And so we look at this and we take that inbound call data, and we look at what we call these heat maps. And this is very consistent, whether it's home health or hospice, you see the same arrival patterns. So the darker the this area right here, that's your higher call volumes. And so when you have those darker call volumes, that's when you need the most staff. And here, where it's very light, that's where you need lower staff. What we tend to find, again, is we say this is your inbound call. For each inbound call, there's a number of outbound calls that you're going to make. Those inbound calls create some sort of an additional workload. And this is the outbound call flow. And then we convert that into FTEs, right? This is a raw FTE count. And then we can round up. What does that roundup look like? Or just round, because they also have an opportunity for CareXM, our clinical team, to support them and back them up. So you can see they might want to staff heavily when when the needs are there, or more even staff even higher than they typically do. But they can also use CareXM as the backup. So that's the specific detail that we get into. And then we look and say, okay, if CareXM is backup, what would that do from a financial perspective? What impact would that have on a financial perspective? How many people do you still need? How many can you reassign to other areas of the organization, et cetera? So you're what we find is that they're typically overstaffed. I've seen examples where staff, their staff utilization is in the teens. And again, we can't afford to do that anymore. We really have to have the staff utilization much higher. And so again, getting into the details, driving down to the details, and then assigning those folks where we need to. And then one other last thing, I make it very clear that when we change our mindset, one of the biggest changes is we, rather than having a full-time employee, we call it a full-time equivalent. And so we can assign those people where we need to. We can adjust and think outside the box and have maybe hybrid nurses where um, they work in the morning and or the early morning, and then they're home still to let the kiddos go to school. And then they work during the day and they're home when the kiddos come back, or they do an after hours a little bit, a few hours there. So you can be very flexible in what you offer to your staff, and it really and to match up when those specific needs are. So there's a few examples of how we get pretty specific in the data.
Perfect. I'm a huge baseball fan, so I particularly love the heat map. It almost reminds me of the pitcher strike zone and where they're throwing pitches most frequently. Lori, could you share how you utilize data to drive programs?
Yeah, I actually was going to use a sports analogy as well, Bob. So I'm glad you're a baseball fan. I call myself a has-been athlete. I'm a sports fan myself. In my spare time, I coach basketball for my girls, and they're fourth and fifth grade girls. So when you were thinking of that age, a lot of the success of the game is really driven by anybody that can actually dribble the ball up the court and score, right? So we kind of overlook the other players who can't do that. So one of my specific plans as a coach when we're in a game is to take stats of all the things. We call them hustle stats, where they earn jelly beans because of the different things. So we look at stats like tips and steals and rebounds and things like that. So when you look at the big picture of a game, and when you're maybe a staff member on a hospice team or a basketball team member, it's really easy to focus on those big emotional scoring points. I got a rebound, I dribbled, or hey, the patient passed at 2 a.m. I got to call it 4 a.m. That emotion that drives a lot of our decisions, instead of taking a step back and saying, wow, you didn't score, but you got 7 hustle plays. You got 12 jelly beans for doing X, Y, and Z and all these data. It changes the perspective of the player who can't dribble or can't score, right? They still feel like they're part of team and being successful because of all of the little pieces of data that were captured. Well, it's the same with our team when we are doing after hours, right? If we can understand why patients are calling when, what a staffing model looks like, for me, the expectations is maybe the after hours nurse may change. Oh, I can see that historically in my heat map, we're getting, 6 calls per hour. I can handle 6 calls per hour. That feels like, productivity that I can manage. Or at 12 a.m., I can anticipate once a week, I'm going to get 2 calls, every other night. That changes the expectation of the staff member if there's data to support it, instead of the emotion of I'm getting calls at midnight, that's going to wake me up, or I'm getting calls at 2 a.m., right? So when you go back to your staffing models, when you go back to your patient care, you really cannot be fully successful as a team without data. You're always going to see those emotional wins or the emotional scores, or maybe the losses, the emotional loss of a bad experience, and it's going to overshadow the big picture after hour support. So that data itself, it may feel like it's overwhelming to approach and start to figure out what I need to understand. So if you really have a solution that's capturing that for you in your day-to-day tasks, that takes that feeling of being overwhelmed out of the equation. You can just understand, okay, I have the ability to see these things, and now my decisions change. My quality program changes. You know, when you think of the final payment rule that just came out, there's a huge correlation between quality and your payment models, right? So if you already have something doing that data gathering and work for you, it takes that emotional loss out of the way because you're prepared to identify your gaps. You're going to already understand that, hey, I am not capturing my symptom management the right way. Oh, I can already see that we have a lag in follow-up in response to our patients. I can already identify my gaps before the survey comes out that may ding me for, delay in patient care or something like that. So when we think of data, it has to be your number one partner in everything that you do that drives your decisions in your business. And there are lots of ways to gather it, spreadsheets, a notebook, reports out of 7 different places, but really find a way to efficiently gather your information so you have visibility that drives decisions and drives staffing. Because if expectations are set with your staff, it allows them to do their job differently if they already know what to expect. Takes the emotion out of it. We're all guilty of that, right? We run on emotion because we're humans, but it does always feel better when you have something that validates your emotion or supports your expectation. So data, data, data. You can't get enough of it in all of the things that you're doing to support your patients.
Yep. I loved that analogy. And if I had a coach as good as you, maybe I would have played basketball a little bit longer. We're highlighting peace of mind in staffing and financial performance. Could you each maybe share how you've seen providers achieve a better peace of mind? Lori, let's stick with you first, and then Dean, go to you for that question.
Yeah, I would definitely say peace of mind in staffing is really being able to, with our partners' responses, being able to continue to do good patient care or business as usual without a lot of changes. So when I say that, having a partner where you can have staff members, mission-driven partners that support your own goals and mission allows you to have stability and flexibility. You've got to be able to say dial up or dial down the support you need with your partners because everything can happen in a moment, right? You may have somebody who calls in sick, who resigns, who goes on maternity leave, and you can't reinvent your whole process because one person, decided to do something different or called in sick. So being able to really have that backup support with a partner that allows you to create a flexible, stable model, I think is really that peace of mind. I know that in our partnerships, just in the last 3 weeks, I can tell you of about 6 different stories where somebody has left the company of a partner that we have, or they have grown so much, they had an acquisition, they're trying to standardize. People have holiday coverage they need, sick calls, people going on maternity leave, and being able to just do business as usual with all those little things that will come up and do come up is peace of mind in staffing. And your standard operating procedure doesn't have to change because there's something different with one of your staff members today. So definitely have a partner that can support you and back you up in your mission driven approach to support your patients. Maybe offload some of those burdens is really peace of mind in staffing.
Dean, how have you seen providers that you work with achieve a better peace of mind?
Yeah, Bob, ironically, we make them a little bit nervous to begin with. When we compare their current state model with a future state model where we can apply those technologies to drive optimization of their workforce and yet keep a high level of job satisfaction. We sometimes show a reduction of that workforce by anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70%, and even more sometimes. So leveraging technology and having the confidence and the track record of being able to do more with less originally makes them quite nervous. But then I heard last week someone referred to it as a cover charge, right? So the technology is sort of a cover charge. You're optimizing your internal workforce as much as possible, your internal resources, and that technology also allows, as Laurie referenced, the ability to leverage sort of a instant PRN, if you will. So leveraging our own nurses so that those patients have the ability to connect with a nurse 24/7, really, not just after hours or weekends, but 24/7 to connect with a nurse well within a minute. So those clinical calls that sometimes there are folks on the other line with a lot of anxiety, and the last thing they want to do is tell the story and share what's going on and then hang up and wait for a call back. They want to talk to a clinician right away and address that immediate problem immediately rather than wait. And so from a peace of mind perspective, really reducing that, first of all, giving them the confidence that the models are accurate, and then having the confidence that when they do apply that model, they have the ability to address those immediate patient needs, really gives them the peace of mind. And then they're able to meet those financial perspectives and actually reallocate a lot of the finances from what they were doing in after hours to other areas of the organization.
Yep. Just I'm going to take a quick second to clarify something. We have a question from the audience. Somebody's asking, when you talk about partners for staffing, are you talking about a staffing agency or other healthcare agencies in your area? Lori, Dean, I believe we're talking about any partner that really assists as a staffing solution, with CareXM being a prime example, correct?
Yeah, and one of the things that we do also recommend as you have multiple locations is really understanding if there is a way for you to create efficiency. If you have two branches, do you need two people staffing those branches, or can you consolidate to one for certain times of day? So even as you are talking about your own internal team members, what does efficiency look like? Can you share staff in a way that makes sense with different, geographic locations or partners, as you mentioned, Bob? Just
Thank you.
thinking differently than you have
We've seen,
before.
yeah, Bob, we've seen models where uh, each location has an on-call, whether that be hospice. Normally hospice, you do need that unless they're really, really small census. But in home health, you might not. There are areas of the country where you may have multiple offices in the same geographic location. Take Dallas, for example, or any major metropolitan area. You may have multiple offices, and traditionally you've had maybe an AOC that is getting paid a little bit of extra for covering that after hours, and you have in each location somebody who's covering that after hours. But now with technology, we call it the clustering effect. You don't need that many, as Laurie mentioned, you just don't. So there's a tremendous opportunity to reduce cost in that way as well. But again, you can't do it. You gotta do it smartly. You can't do that at the expense of the patient experience. But if you can still meet or exceed what you're providing today, then it's a win for the organization.
Perfect. Thank you both. We only have about 15 minutes or so left. So I want to get to one more question that I had on my list, and then we're going to turn to some of the audience Q&A because we have a lot of questions coming in. And as a reminder to anybody tuning in, if you do have a question you want to ask, please speak up, send those my way using the Q&A function here in Zoom. I think my final question, out of all of the approaches that we've talked about, how do they all empower RNs to spend more time on critical care? Lori, why don't we start with you again, and then Dean, take us to the finish line, and then we'll get to that audience Q&A.
Yeah, when you think of empowering RNs, we want all nurses to be able to work to the top of their license. So by empowering them, we want them to feel that we know that the reason they came into healthcare is to care for patients. Most nurses didn't come in to do administrative tasks, they came to the patient care, right? So we want them to feel like in their role, their value comes from that skill that they have to offer the company and the patient. So finding ways to take away any tasks as much as possible that you can that allows them to do the skill that they have the license for is always the goal. And that even comes with the interaction between nurses, right? So when I was on call, I started my home health hospice journey as the on-call nurse about 20 years ago. And I never minded if a patient called me for a crisis need. I always got bugged when the need became, man, why didn't somebody handle this during the day? Why are they calling in for this non-urgent need where it's disrupting their evening because they had to call back, or it's interrupting, my time as being on call, seeing other patients, was a task that could have been handled earlier. So making sure that as we analyze our data, as we create our staffing models, it allows our nurses to always work at the top of their license and always handling the needs for their role. So as an after hours nurse, they're on for crisis care, right? As a case manager, they're to manage the care of the whole patient. So making sure that appropriate tasks are cared for by the right person really empowers that nurse in their role to give the best patient focused care possible. So that's always the end goal, is to be able to really allow them to do their best at the job that we want them to do.
Dean.
Yeah, and Lori just used the term focused patient care. And leveraging technology allows the nurses to really focus on that moment, on that patient in that moment. I know that we've heard many a story where a nurse is with a patient and they're getting another call. Or a triage nurse is on the line with a patient and they can see that the queue is building. And so that adds additional stress. Alleviating that additional stress, alleviating the requirement of having to manage multiple patients at one time allows those nurses to really be in the moment with the patient, with the family, right then and there, and not have to worry about, oh, what is this call coming in? Is this another emergency that I need to really take care of? And they don't have to worry about that anymore. So it really provides them the opportunity to have that intimate moment when they need it with that patient or family member.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive into audience Q&A, because we did promise that we would get to a few, and we have about 10 minutes left. So we will dive right in. Somebody is asking, what programs have you seen generate a positive ROI? And kind of like we did before, whoever wants to take that one, just go ahead and dive in.
Yeah. Dean, you want me to go or you want to go?
So go ahead and I'll maybe follow you up there.
Yeah. So I think the most success that we have found is really creating what we would consider a hybrid approach to your after hours care. So historically, we've always relied on our own staff handling all the calls and all the visits, and that has worked well until it hasn't, right? So being able to have a hybrid approach to caring for your patients after hours, as much as we have referenced maybe larger organizations running a contact center, every single hospice location is a contact center because all your interactions start with a phone call from a patient, right? That's typically how we communicate with our patients. So everybody's running a contact center. So being able to have a partner that will allow you to care for your patients and take calls after hour in a hybrid approach, meaning you have a backup plan if your primary plan doesn't go over well. So you have the opportunity to have more ROI as you have flexible staffing appropriately for the call volume coming in. So being able to have a backup nurse, if your team's not available because they're taking calls, allows that empowerment for the nurse, right? The focused patient care. But also, if you need 1.25 employees, historically, we've just rounded up and be like, well, I need more than one, so I'm going to staff two. Well, imagine if you could save that 0.75 by having a partner who you could just overflow those calls to when you need them at a cheaper rate than staffing a full-time person. So finding a hybrid solution in grabbing your calls after hour is where we have found a lot of success with our partners in finding an ROI with a vendor.
Yeah, one of our very early clients, potential clients, their challenge really was, well, staffing was a challenge at the time, but it really was that patient experience. And so we put a model together, and the goal, their financial model suggested that they would have about a 50% savings, and the client would be happy with a break even. They just wanted to make sure that the patient experience was improved, dramatically improved. And so we did a pilot with this organization where three large hospice locations, where their annual budget was about $5 million for the after hours. And at the end of that pilot, they noticed a significant improvement in the patient experience. The responses were good. The calls were being answered. Their internal caregivers, their internal team were happier. And we did actually hit that $2.5 million savings in that run rate. So we were able to reduce that cost by 50% and improve that patient experience. So they were thrilled, just thrilled. And I would say that the vast majority of our clients do realize a significant return on investment once they apply the solutions.
Perfect. Thank you both. We have another quick question here from the audience. Does your platform slash CareXM, does it integrate with EMRs?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Our goal is to allow that technology to do the complex workflows and create efficiency. So, yes, we have created an interface with multiple EMRs that allows the triage team to view information and send the notes back in a really efficient manner. So there's no double charting, there's no logging into multiple systems to get your call log created and reporting and analytics and all that fun stuff we're trying to capture. So the interface we have found is a successful way to create efficiency and automation through a technology workflow.
Yeah, and I would say, Laura, you probably know better than I, but the number of interfaces that we have, or the number of EMRs with whom we have interfaces, is pretty significant. I would say it covers, I don't know, my guess is 90% of all hospice patients. So, but if a particular EMR, we don't have an interface, certainly we're there and willing to develop that if that's the need.
And we have time for maybe one more question from the audience. Can your triage team take all of our calls, especially in after hours? Lori, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And we can take all your calls. The beauty of our partnership goes back to that idea of we really want to be a flexible staffing model support for whatever your needs may be. And we have noticed with many of our partners that it may start out one way, and as staff changes happen, it moves into another way. So there are many people who start out, just take all our calls. We're in a crisis, we're in a crunch, take all our calls. And then as they settle into getting their staffing where they want it to be, or as they grow, they recognize that, they have the ability to grab some of those calls on their own, and we're just now the backup support as needed. So the short answer is yes, we can take all your calls, but the most important thing to remember is that we can grow and be flexible as your needs and growth need to be flexible as well.
Dean, anything that you'd like to add?
Ditto what Lori said. I mean, she's the expert, support everything that she said, but I just thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. Well, I think that is a good point to wrap up this webinar. I found the conversation very insightful. I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. As a reminder for everybody tuning in, you will receive a recording of this shortly after the presentation wraps up. I've been speaking with Lori Nelson, Head of Clinical Solutions at CareXM, and Dean Somerville, Triage Solutions Director at CareXM. A huge thank you to both of them, both of you guys, for joining me today, and an equally big thank you to CareXM for making this conversation possible. Of course, thanks to all of you who tuned in. That's all for me. Have a great day.
Thank you.